Hey everybody, up next we will be talking about the Global Health Impact Network Education platform. And our speaker is going to be Bob Sweeney, who is one of the founding principals for Global Health Impact Network and the Global Health Impact Fund. Bob, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. I'm happy to be here. It's an exciting topic for me. I'm looking forward to our conversation and to whatever questions and comments our audience might have.
Well, why don't we start with a quick introduction of yourself?
All right. Well, I'm Bob Sweeney. I've been involved in clinical education or the management of clinical education companies for a long time. I spent my first 15 years as a manager, first running a health maintenance organization, and then I ran contract medicine groups for a long time. In fact, I was one of the founders of Team Health, which is a very large contract medicine company in the United States. I went from there to Challenger Corporation, where I served as the CEO for nearly 20 years and worked with my colleagues there to build a national audience, a national market for online medical products, both institutional and retail. And then I resigned from there 4 or 5 years ago because I wanted to do something else with my life in addition to that. And so I met Gary Goldman, whom I'd known for quite a while. And Gary and I said, let's start a venture capital fund and a venture capital network with an education component. And I said, well, that's great. That appeals to me. We'll learn as we go, and we'll try to make something that people can actually use. So I did that. I've got a 10-year academic background. I have a doctorate in history from Carnegie Mellon University, an MBA degree, and an MS in experimental psychology from the University of Memphis, and a variety of other experiences teaching and writing books. So I've spent a lot of time in the educational field, made plenty of mistakes. I'm looking forward to sharing my adventures with others.
And that's a pretty impressive record. Thanks, Bob. So let me ask you this before we kick off. So why an educational network?
Yeah. Well, our belief about education, it goes back to what does education mean? And, for a long time and traditionally it meant there was a source of knowledge, an instructor, and there were learners. And the information, the messaging was one way. It went from the teacher to the audience. Well, that's not really how people learn. There's been an awful lot of research done in the last several years about how people learn things. And that research hasn't yet produced the results we'd like to see in terms of fitting in with how people actually learn things. I'll talk about that a little bit today. But the idea of a network was that we would engage both sources of knowledge and people who can use it and focus on those areas where they could collaborate and share information with each other and therefore learn collectively as they went along. We think that's a lot of what goes on actually in clinical education. When a physician is treating patients or dealing with at the point of care, he or she is often in the company of other professionals and also in the company of the patient, and they learn from one another. And that's what education is, the sharing of knowledge and the retention of that knowledge for future uses.
Perfect. So why does the Global Health Impact Network, why is it important for us to have an education network?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, every professional clinician, probably most professionals in major fields, I know it's true in accounting and law, are required to be educated. In fact, there are formal education requirements they have to meet periodically to retain their licensing. They have to have education in order to acquire their license. They have performance requirements they have to meet. So it's a requirement of clinical personnel to have education. It's material to their actual practice. We felt also we were well suited to do this because many of our customers and many of the people that we had met over the years and worked with were in fact educators in the clinical space. And we wanted to include them in what we were going to build. And finally, of course, I had spent so many years as a clinical educator and running clinical education companies. The company believed I would be able to help them organize that process in a way that would be useful and beneficial for our members.
Okay, so what makes the education network so unique?
So the content is taken from peer-reviewed, high-quality sources, or it's content we produce ourselves. You'll find when you look closely at medical practice, there's much knowledge or much content that falls between the cracks. I'll give you a good example because we're producing a course right now in this space. So primary care and acute care physicians deal with personal interaction with the everyday health of their patients. But there are things that relate to their musculoskeletal health that you won't find in a typical textbook for family medicine or journal articles for emergency physicians. And physiatry is a specialty. I mean, musculoskeletal medicine is a specialty, but it often, when you think about it that way, it's high-level care, tertiary care, complex things that take place in teaching hospitals. But are there things in the musculoskeletal area that technically aren't part of family medicine or emergency medicine, but would be of value for those practicing docs to know about and have expertise with and have experience with the procedures involved? We think so. We have an expert physician, a couple of them actually, working for us to design this content. Nina Karandikar from Stanford and Becca Rosen from the University of New Mexico. And these are people that are very expert in this area and will produce a product that we can use. The second thing has to do with the process itself. In this network, the stuff that we're producing and using is made available to our membership, thousands of physicians and other clinical professionals who can use it and then feed back to us information that lets us revise the content and upgrade it. So we actually have the distinguishing characteristic about a member of a Global Health Impact Network is that they participate effectively in creating the fund itself. They create what we use because they draw from their own experience to comment on and refresh our content. We have established sources like MedForums and Challenger Corporation and others who provide their peer-reviewed content to us. We also develop it ourselves. Just take Challenger as an example. They have something like 200 professional editors and reviewers who prepare this material. I've seen this material even used, the production of that material used as an item on a CV for people seeking tenure at universities. I mean, it's very well regarded. Now, how do they use it? They use it for boards prep, for preparing for their boards examinations or recertification. They use it to meet licensure standards in states or other areas. They use it to present competency and specific skills like trauma care. And they also use it to refresh their skills. So physicians who've practiced medicine for a while, they might want to have a refresher course in ultrasound, or they might want to learn something new that's completely new about medicine. Suppose they want to understand something about blockchain, which, frankly, I don't know a lot about, but it's a new force with a heavy prominence in medicine. And so we make it possible for these docs to use it easily and effectively and without great expense. And they can then share their findings and observations with us and their colleagues. It's a very personal and very fulfilling experience to be able to study in a way where you can provide feedback and believe that your own insights, comments, and questions will be taken seriously by the people who create the content themselves. Another aspect of this training is that our efforts will embed the latest research findings in education as a science itself. We hear the phrase commonly used evidence-based medicine, but there's a great deal of the same type of activity in education. But a lot of places, including many, many medical schools and medical training institutes, don't use evidence-based medicine, evidence-based education, because they're not familiar with the findings. And we try to embed those things in the content and in the process itself. Things like the timing of how often should you study? How often should you rehearse or review material? How long should a test be? How many questions should you ask at once? What's the retention time for the typical user? Those things are not used as factors in the design of training content in medicine. More often, you're using things for other purposes. For example, large organizations, even medical societies, want to use content that's easy to write. So they make a simple question and answer process that's simple to use, and it's simple to score. So if you're testing thousands of physicians, it's easier to score something that has simple answers than something that doesn't. I'm just giving you some examples, but we try to create a structure or an infrastructure, if you will, that embeds these principles without having to spell it out, but it affects the learning and retention on the part of our users.
Okay, that's superb. And then, I would like to talk a little bit more about like the assessment platform of the education part. Can you just explain, what it is we're doing with this?
Well, an assessment platform ought to provide a variety of information to not just to the learners, but to the instructors as well. Let's suppose you have a course that has 25 different topics and has a couple of hundred questions and answers associated with it. How do you know which parts of that curriculum are effective? Do you know who misses the most questions? Do you know which answers are most often need to be corrected? Do you use that information to help focus on parts of instruction where individual or groups of people are deficient? And does that deficiency tell you that there's something wrong with the course itself or its instruction, or that your learners are having a difficulty with that type of information? Many people do better with audiovisual instruction. Others rely pretty much on pedagogic text. Others rely on the exchange itself of question and answer to improve their learning. And assessment platforms usually provide you with global information about how many people passed the test and what was their average score, but they don't tell you individually how your members have done. They don't provide you with that level of detail. They don't tell you how often you should test. They don't tell you which parts of your curriculum are supplementary and supportive of others. That kind of information can be collected and displayed in a way that makes it possible for both the instructor and the learner to see what it is they're learning and how quickly. You can also, if you're teaching in a large institution like a residency program with 50 or 60 people in it, you can see, if you're the residency program director, for example, you can see who's behind, who's ahead, who's not completed their work. If you were running a medical group, say, instead of a residency program, maybe the group wants to know what areas of knowledge or cognitive skill or procedural skill their members seem to have deficiencies in. And they can collect that information anonymously if they wish to, and then use it to inform what goes on in the quality assurance committee to teach the staff how to do better in handling these kinds of cases. The assessment platform could be easily displayed. It takes half an hour to walk an interested party through it, and we'd be glad to do that. But it's highly effective that way, and it also is prescriptive. It can let you know which areas you need to study more and what topics or places where you need to spend more time looking at references or sources, and we provide those references, of course. Does that give you an idea about what we're talking about here, Martin?
It does. For me, I'd love to know a little bit more of why an assessment platform is so important to GHIN and the strategy that especially the education network is going down.
Well, it's important because you have to know whether your instruction is effective. How do you know if it works? And how do you know if your students are doing well or doing poorly? How can you attach those outcomes to components of your instruction program? And a good assessment program should let you do that. It will give you insight and detail into what's going on with your users. It'll tell you things like how long does it, if they take repetitive tests or scores, what's the longitudinal rate at which people learn things? How long will they retain that information if you test them again? Uh, where do they spend more of their time, and which questions and which topics are more time intensive? That information is part of education. It's part of instruction. And even if you're not using a formal instruction system, users who use this assessment system can learn things about themselves that they didn't know. Well, if you study a topic and if you're interested in it, when should you retest yourself or refresh yourself? What's the gap? Because there's plenty of evidence that gaps are critical to learning. It takes time for your brain to form and retain components of knowledge. It doesn't just go in once and go out the other ear. And it doesn't just go in there and if you can let it sit so long that it atrophies, goes away. Or if you time it correctly, you can reinforce what's already there and embed the learning. Those are things that are just most people that are instructing, even in a professional environment, aren't aware of. And we're trying to build that in because we want to have an education system that people find will be functional for their retaining and learning things, and a way to prove to themselves that their effort has been worthwhile.
Okay, so we're talking about the users who are going to be using the platform. Like, can you explain what kinds of materials going to be on the platform? Like, is GHIN creating all these materials, or are we partnering with other companies to deliver these education parts?
We're doing both, and we're selecting material. We can, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If there's good content from other sources, we use it. How do we know that? Well, we look at we have experts in medicine, not me, who look at the content and tell us if it's accurate. These people essentially are peer reviewing the content to see if it meets up to an expectation of being independent and being able to be verified by our users. Secondly, we have data collection. Information is invaluable. Does a training institution or does an individual want to have a reservoir of information about themselves? A lot of people do. What makes a network functional? What makes a network have a high engagement rate? Because engagement is what matters when you're building a network. And if people will engage and use things that are of value to themselves, but that value doesn't have to be just a score on a test. Sometimes that's all people are interested in, but others are often interested in what it is they're learning and how to retain it. Others that teach themselves want to know what things should they focus on that are going to engage the attention of their users and will actually reinforce their learning. I could give you some examples. We have courses, for example, in ECG interpretation. I'll just take that as an example. It's a pretty straightforward technology. But when you're teaching it, how do you know, other than the test outcome, if people that are going to be in practice actually functionally know how to use the technology? Those are things that will be valuable for users because they'll feel like they have more control over their own lives if they can do that, and will engage them with the network, make them more interested in using it.
Okay, so you've had a very extensive background, especially when it comes to the education part. What's your vision for the GHIN Education platform? Where do you want to see this platform going?
What I would like to see the platform and its tools, its assessment platform, and its content development process imported into and used by other organizations that are in this space. If you're a healthcare company, or particularly if you're a medical group or a medically oriented organization or a specialty society, wouldn't it be beneficial to engage the capabilities of a company, of our network, that's based and designed from principles of evidence-based education to teach people? You can improve your own organization that way because it's a secular system. We're not limiting who can use this. All you have to do is be a member of the network, which is free, in order to be able to use these things. We would like to see the use of these principles become sufficiently widespread that that it can be verified that educational training and testing actually has a positive outcome. It isn't just based on hearsay or anecdotal information. That's the golden standard. And how will we know that? we'll know that if individual practitioners and medical and healthcare organizations join and actually use our technology and our content.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about cross platforms and engagement. Like, what would it take for other companies to engage with the network to bring these assessments to their organizations, and how can these organizations benefit more from the expertise of the likes of yourself and Gary and the whole GHIN network?
Well, I can give you an example that might just illustrate what I'm talking about. Basically, we could work with any education company that's willing to try something new and effective. So one of the organizations we're joint venturing with is called Med Forums. It's a physician-designed company based in Salt Lake City, and they make, amongst other things, they make a credentialing system or a badging system to provide what amounts to a good housekeeping seal of approval on content. So we've agreed with Med Forums to let them rate and badge the content on our system, whether it comes from them or another source or is ours alone. So when you use it, you'll have that seal of approval on it, and that lends more credibility to its usage. In exchange for that, they gain access to our network, which spreads the use of their design technology for rating, and we can expand it into the physician community writ large. Same thing can apply to the use of the platform. Let's suppose you have your own platform, or either a legacy platform or something else that you're using. If you want to improve it or modify it or expand it, you can join our network and we'll work with you to expand the use of that platform into your instructional environment. The test at the end of the day is, does it produce the results that we're looking for? Any educational system needs to have objectives. It can be passing a test, it can be learning skills, it can be expanding your knowledge. It can be proving that you're in touch with new technology and new ideas. We'll have a platform. We'll have a sector based on blockchain technology, which I'm just learning about. And blockchain technology is very material to the future of healthcare information systems. Why not? Why can't we have a course in that area? And why can't we use our assessment platform to measure the learning and application of this skill on the part of clinicians and organizations?
Hi. I've had questions to ask you. Is there any other questions you want me to ask you? Because I can't think of anything off the top of my head. So we got like 10,
you
10
might
15
ask,
minutes.
you might ask something like, how willing are the professionals to use new methods to learn things or to improve their records?
So, Bob, can you tell us how professionals react to new education and new technologies?
Yeah, I think I can. I mean, I've worked with physicians for almost 40 years, thousands of them over the period of time. One thing I've learned is that very few physicians are excited about the prospect of taking another test. Now, they'll study in order to pass the test because they have to, but that's not what the emotional motivation is. They want to learn things. Physicians are learners. They're scientists. They're curious. And yes, they do have to study in order to pass exams, in order to meet one criterion or another, but they also want to improve their skills, and they want to improve their insight into what's going on with their patients. So I've found that, if when it comes to the formal testing or education requirements, the certifications, the licensing expectations and things of that kind, most physicians just want to do whatever they have to do to pass the exam. They'll go to conferences, they'll buy a book, they'll get online and take some courses, and they're basically loading up information to pass an exam or to meet a licensure expectation or to satisfy some requirement to practice a certain kind of skill. But when it comes to learning that will make them better practitioners, better people, if you will, or more understanding of the interface between clinical evidence and practice. They're open to all kinds of ideas. And so the things I mentioned earlier about learning how often to study, learning what mix of questions and answers or studying techniques to use, learning learning more about themselves in terms of the methods by which they learn. Do they respond to audiovisual information? Do they respond to text? Do they respond to question formats? How long a gap does it take? That information is critically interesting to most docs. And I found when I was a CEO in this space that CME is a pretty, commodity type product. You get CME for basically showing up and eating hot dogs at a conference and filling out the back page of a booklet, which doesn't really mean you learned anything at all for more than the 20 minutes you paid attention to get the test done. But if you want to learn something, you want to spend enough time to acquire that skill, and at the end of the day, believe you have it. And so the methods that we're importing from the world of educational science, are actually materially of interest to our users. I can give you the best example I had of that was when I worked at Challenger Corporation as the CEO. We took learning materials, and we were selling things at a premium price, and people bought it because they knew that they were getting a quality product and they would learn better than just regurgitating answers from a presentation at a conference someplace. So physicians are curious, they're open to learning things, they're scientists, but they learn better if the environment tells them or conveys to them that they'll be better practitioners and more knowledgeable once they do this, not just that they pass a test. Did that answer helpful?
It is. Like, the big question I have for this is, how can we make sure these physicians and these organizations, collaborate with one another to create a better education system for both organization and both for the physician?
Well, I think that, it's a good question, because naturally, at least for the commercial companies that are in this space, it's very competitive and they're motivated by profits. If you look at the American education industry, there's lots of different ways to count it, but you can think of it as having a huge industry-sponsored component, billions of dollars. I think the last number I saw was $4 billion. And $2 billion is in the non-industry sponsored area. That's the stuff that universities make, professors make on their own, and there are some that are used by companies that produce peer-reviewed content, meaning the content itself is not subject to authoring or tampering by a sponsoring industry source. And you can see that when the audience believes that the material they're being presented is at an arm's length from sponsorship by industry, they have more enthusiasm for it. It's more credible to them. And you can make a market of that if you do it correctly.
Okay, so I'd love for you just to talk a little bit more about like the GHIN of why did you want to set up this education? Like, at the very beginning, you said you wanted to go into the venture capital side of things. Like, how important is the education network that plays into the investing side of things as well?
Right. Well, there's a number of ways they overlap with each other. First of all, the network is a source of potential investors for the fund. Many of the people that belong to the network have decided they're so interested in what we're trying to do that they ask if they can invest. And it's actually quite affordable for practicing clinicians to do that. And the fund we've created is a unique one. It's aimed at physicians. So our members, our investors, by and large, are individual physicians, individual clinicians, or people in healthcare. And one of the things that appeals to them is that this is an organization run largely by the fellows like them. 3 of our 5 general principals are physicians. We have a finance officer who's not a physician, a young guy that works with us, and we have me, I've worked with docs for 40 years. I think they make me an honorary physician when they're kind-hearted enough to do that. But it's run by physicians. We have a very powerful due diligence network of docs. So ask yourself, when was the last time anybody who ran a big venture firm, or any medical firm for that matter, called you up as a practitioner and asked you what you thought we might invest in, or whether the thing that we were thinking about would actually work or be used? We do that. We actually have committees that look at potential investments. And those committees are dominated by physician members of ours or other physicians that we bring in to take a look at it. And they tell us, if they can't tell us that the product will actually work and that it will be used if it gets into the market, we don't invest in it. And by doing that, we increase our likelihood of actually having more success. So investors in our company become members, and they become active with our clients. We have several examples where physicians are either board members or they serve as advisors to these companies they've actually helped us select. So they get a personal feedback in their own lives from having played a good, important role in helping a potential company become successful. So it's a back and forth relationship. Network members can become investors. They don't have to, but if they can, they do. They also provide leads to us on both investment prospects and on other investors. And of course, investors automatically become members, and they can point out to us other potential investors or other companies we might look at. It's a very synergistic relationship. And I think the key to it is that we have a structure here that comes to the aid of what we call the disenfranchised physician. If you look around medicine in the United States and probably elsewhere, a lot of docs are burned out, and they feel like nobody really asks them any questions when it comes to doing things novel, whether it's using new technology or putting in new ways of doing things. And you'll find that most of the physicians in the United States, for example, are very unhappy with electronic health records and how they were put in, because nobody asked them about how to do it and what type of model would work. It was purely driven by industry. But we're trying to get away from that. And by empowering docs, we not only give them more control over their own lives, but we give them an antidote to burnout, because they feel like that they're involved in what's going on in a critical role.
And I think it's important for everyone to understand the synergies between education, the fund, and the network. So thank you for that. Is there anything else you want to talk about the network that the listeners should know about? Do you have any advice for those who aren't part of the education series but should be?
Well, there's some exciting things going on. We're expanding into other countries, building rooms for things to do. It doesn't have to be medicine. If you have an interest in venture capital, we have a section on that and a section in our education system on it. So we can teach you the elements that you might learn in an MBA course or a finance course right on our network. We have a lot of experience in that area.
Great to see you. Thank you for that great talk. Bob and I have known each other for a long time, when we were both young guys. So yeah, it's kind of exciting to really talk about the educational component of it, because that's how Bob and I met, 20, almost 30 years ago now. I guess what I want to talk a little bit about is the possibilities for how to change the way we educate and change the process a little bit. Bob and I met again, 25 plus years ago around continuing education. That was my first company. His company had acquired my first company. And even in those days, we were looking at a prescriptive learning model, right? Where you weren't just educating yourself, but you were educating yourself with a system that took you in the direction of where you lacked knowledge, as opposed to continuously reading about what you already knew.
Yeah.
And that to me was really radical from that perspective, because at that time, all we had was a portal where we were throwing up some education. And here we are, fast forward. So now we have technology, and Bob talked a little bit about some of the relationships that we're forging and partnerships like Med Forums, with the idea of feedback loops and feedback mechanisms about education. But let's take it another step. And we've talked a little bit about this. We've got a partner of ours that's working on data analytics, and another company within our network which is looking at surgical quality. And there are all these tools out there to look at clinicians and look at clinicians' practices and look at the diversity of their practices. You can have a general surgeon who may do a lot of thyroidectomies, but maybe only does a couple of gallbladders a year. And how do we have ways now leveraged on electronic healthcare systems and data to look at a practitioner's outcomes in a way where they can be, not criticized, but certainly compared to their regional and national performances.
Right.
And it was just recently brought up to me, and I brought it to Bob, about the idea of taking that data and then creating, to coin a term we hear, precision medicine all the time, precision education, where now clinicians could have continuing medical education curriculums, okay, which are, by the way, mandatory. This is not something you may want to do. You have to do it to maintain board certification, to maintain licensing. So there's lots of reasons why you need to do it, but do it in a way where it's more than just prescriptive, but it's actually precision customized for you based on your practices, and not necessarily the strengths in your clinical practice, but the weaknesses that you have, but done in a somewhat anonymized way. What are your thoughts on that, Bob?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a timely one. I'll give you an example. Recently, I had a discussion of some depth with the CEO of one of our client companies, Plethy, which deals with post-operative rehabilitation in orthopedics and other areas. And I asked the president, I asked the CEO, how do you get your big clients? There's a tremendous amount of competition here. Everybody and his brother has a new solution for this kind of issue. What makes you stand out, and why do big orthopedic organizations like the Ohio Alliance for Healthcare and Illinois Bone and Joint, why are they picking you to use? And he said, I've got something that other companies don't have. Aside from being reimbursable, which of course that's important too. He says, I've got data. And one thing that drives decision-making by large medical groups or hospital institutions or places like this is data. And they collect it, and and then they're able to use that information to tailor the solutions they provide to individual patients based on that information. The precision element of this is where we're going in the future, I think. We've seen it already, and you know better than me, the audience knows better than me, in oncology, where tailored precision medications for this patient and that seems to be becoming the standard when it comes to addressing aggressive illnesses. And so I think that's going to expand to other spaces as it becomes plausible. And it is plausible with the technologies we have right now. You got anything you want to add to that, Gary? Go ahead.
No, I would agree with a lot of that, and then just taking a step back towards what we're trying to create at the network, and certainly leverage, with our partnership with our fund and other funds, is that, trying to be a global agnostic environment that is not just focused on, we're not trying to be the next Medscape. We're not trying to be a Doximity, which is clinical based. We're more focused on innovation, entrepreneurism, acceleration and generation of ideas from clinicians, and providing the supportive ecosystem to make that happen. But much of that is education based. I mean, a good example was Alex's talk before. As you know, I mean, an area for me I find a lot of interest in its possibilities is blockchain in healthcare. But at the end of the day, I would say that if I would venture to bet that if we try to discuss blockchain with most of the members of our network, and certainly many of our colleagues, that what they hear when you say blockchain is Bitcoin, right? But the reality is that blockchain is much more than that. So, Bob and I went, and, when we first met Alex, instead of saying, Alex, help us identify those blockchain startups and blockchain organizations that need to be accelerated, which there aren't that many, certainly domestically. There are some in healthcare. is how do we educate the clinical user base on how we can benefit from it. Let's use some practical examples. So the idea of taking a blockchain community and tying it to, one of our blockchain educational communities and having modules of education related to that to show the value of it and how it can be used, again, stimulating idea generation from clinicians who now are a bit more educated on it and can see the value of it. So, from your perspective, how do we build on that, in the network and start to build these, continue to build these communities? What do we have, like 90 plus communities now, which are not that large because we haven't marketed them quite a bit yet with our new version coming out. But how do we promote it through those communities and promote that education, which then stimulates innovation?
Well, I've got some ideas about that, and they're certainly not necessarily unique to me, and they're certainly not exclusive. But from all the years that I spent running a company that produced new curricula, I can tell you that what you need in any idea community is a champion. You've got to have one or two people, in this case, clinicians, who know something about the area and can provide information or anecdote or whatever with respect to that audience, but also has a passion. They don't have to be the Francis Collins, the head of the NIH. They need to be somebody who's serious about their practice, cares about it, and cares about enough to push new ideas and is willing to put those ideas into a community, which they may monitor or they may be part of, and put those ideas out there for criticism and comment, and then be willing to take the feedback and run with either creating curricula or content or developing forums in which those new ideas can be expressed. It could be a convention, it could be an online conference, but if you don't have a doc backing a project of this kind, it's not going anywhere in the long run.
Yeah, I know we're aligned on this. And that's what we are trying to promote here, correct? Right? We're trying to promote creating these communities, bringing in the knowledge leaders, but then stimulating the interest of the greater global community to collaborate on it. And, it's one of the things that we are trying to build within the network is the idea of not a one and done episodic lecture where you listen to it and it sounds great and then you go back to work and probably the next time you think about it is the next lecture you listen to 6 months later. We're trying to use the education and use the conversations to stimulate ongoing, enduring conversation, which then results in innovation. So,
right.
Yeah.
One of the things that stands out in my view, for us, probably most of the people on this call are familiar with desk drawer studies at pharmacy companies. And what I mean by that is they're looking at the uses of a potential medication. But typically they'll bury negative results so you don't get a truly representative set of findings about effectiveness. You get biased study results. That's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. We want to create communities where these ideas can be criticized and can be looked at and revised, but where the audience, and that could include everybody on this call, can go on there and engage in a conversation with others with the belief and confidence that a full, fair examination of the proposed idea is going to be provided there.
Yeah, I agree. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? It's probably, it's been a relatively long morning and afternoon for a lot of our attendees. Is there anything else that you want to chat about, or we can give them a little bit of a break because we're going to come back at 3:00?
Yeah, I think I'm fine. Education by nature is something that requires a long-term thought process. It's not like an immediate reaction. So I just hope that today I've been able to sow some ideas and some thoughts, and that at least it might encourage some of our audience to join us if they're not already members and look at this opportunity as we build it.
Right. Yeah, and I think, again, shameless pitch. As you join the network, I would encourage everyone. We do have a global health impact network, education network that we've created and continue to grow. We have communities within it, and virtually every community will ultimately have a parallel education community, which will hold its podcasts, which will hold its educational events and summits. So we're going to try to take even the content from this particular day and then unbundle it into its appropriate communities as well, and foster ongoing continuing education in that. So for Bob and for what he's creating, I would encourage anyone who has an interest in educational theory, medical education in general, ideas of how to do things differently than we do, please join the community, get involved in the conversations, collaborate with us, because that's what we are. We're a collaborative community. So Bob, thanks as always. A pleasure to be able to chat with you on a global scale today. And why don't we just give everybody probably 10 minutes or so. And at 3 o'clock, we are going to be talking about the future of telehealth. Our network has a telemedicine 2.0 initiative, which is how do we avoid creating the problems that we did with electronic healthcare records with now this significantly increased usage of telehealth because of the pandemic, and take it into a specialty specific model, which is more comprehensive, which includes remote patient monitoring, chronic CCM patient monitoring systems, and including our goal to create a patient side of our network as well. So thanks, Bob. And why don't we return back in about 10 minutes or so.